So today we're going to start with the first of, actually we are delivering 3 sessions here at DPS this week. So this one is more of an overview session where we'll kind of cover SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines in general. We'll talk a little bit about, what it is, how it's maybe different than running SQL Server on-prem, and most importantly, how it's the same as running SQL Server on-prem. And we'll just kind of give you an overview of running SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine. And then tomorrow, we have a deep dive on sizing and learning more how you can size your workloads in Azure VM. And then on Wednesday, we have a deep dive session on storage. So stay tuned for all of those sessions if you can, but today we'll kick it off with the overview. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. And as we go, by the way, please do feel free to ask us questions. There are 4 of us here, so we're going to try to man your questions as they come in. So do feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll handle them as quickly as we can. We do like to answer questions in line as we're speaking, because if we save them to the end, the context might be missed. So we're happy to answer questions as we go along. So please don't be shy. Drop your questions in the chat and one of us will try to pick them up. Okay, so here we go. So SQL is everywhere. We have so many different flavors of SQL Server right now. We, of course, have your favorite on-prem database engine, SQL Server 2019. We can run SQL on Linux or on Windows, or we can run SQL in containers. So whatever your platform of choice on-prem, we have a flavor of SQL Server for you. And then we can even leverage modern technology like Kubernetes for doing orchestration and high availability in containers. And then we have our cloud offerings running SQL Server in virtual machines in Azure, SQL managed instance. So if you want to do a lift and shift, but you want a PaaS service, then we've got managed instances. Then we've got, of course, our flagship PaaS service, the SQL database in Azure. And if you want to be running on IoT or out on the edge, we've got SQL Edge. So wherever you need to run a database engine, we have a flavor of SQL Server for you. And the best part is they're all running the same database engine that you know and love. And so it's easy for you to take your applications and move them to any one of these platforms and get that same SQL that you love. So today, of course, we're going to focus on Azure SQL Virtual Machines, or SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. So SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines is part of the Azure SQL family. So all of our cloud database services have kind of different targets or different target audiences. So SQL Server on Virtual Machines is a infrastructure as a service, meaning you manage SQL Server, you manage the operating system, you manage the virtual machine itself, and then we manage everything else. We manage the infrastructure for you. And then we have our 2 PaaS services, platform as a service. So Azure SQL Managed Instance is a closer match to what you have on-prem to on-prem SQL Server, allowing you to run multiple databases within a single instance. Or if you have a modernized app, or you want to modernize your app before you migrate to the cloud, then you can use Azure SQL Database, which is our single database offering. So all of these are part of the Azure SQL family. And of course, as we said today, we are going to focus on SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. So we have a number of features and services that run in Azure that help you make the most of your SQL Server investment. So you can get lower cost, you can get simplified HRDR, you can get built-in management and security options, all of this just by running in Azure, and yet it is the same SQL Server that you're running on-prem. So when you're running SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine, you are actually running the same exact SQL Server that you're running on-prem. So you can choose which version of SQL Server you want to run. You can choose which edition of SQL Server you want to run, be it developer or enterprise or standard edition SQL Server. And it's almost exactly the same as what you're getting. The code itself is exactly the same as what you're running on-prem. It's just that the infrastructure is a little bit different. And we provide you all kinds of options to get the workloads that you need running well in Azure. There are also flexible pricing options. So the nice thing about running SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machine is you can choose a pay-as-you-go model, where you're paying a monthly price for SQL Server. Or if you already have SQL Server licenses on-prem, you can leverage those licenses in the cloud by using Azure Hybrid Benefit. So with Azure Hybrid Benefit, you don't have to pay additional charges for SQL Server. You can just take your on-prem licenses and apply them to the cloud. And that actually works for all of Azure SQL. It works, it's easy for VM, but it also works for Azure SQL DB and Azure SQL Managed Instance as well, if you want to leverage those on-prem licenses. Some other ways that you can save cost is by doing reserved instances. So you can reserve a VM for 1 or 3 years, and that lowers the cost of the virtual machine for that period of time. We also have something called spot VMs. Now, this is not something you'd want to use for your production workloads. Spot VMs are VMs where they're low priority, so you only get compute power when there's additional compute power available in Azure. So it's not something you would use for production, but it might be something that would work for your dev machines, especially if they don't use a lot of CPU. That might be something that you could leverage a spot VM for. Extended security updates. So we offer free extended security updates if you're running SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2 in an Azure VM. We also have dev test pricing so that you can lower your costs for your dev and test environments. And we also have Azure Dedicated Host, which allows you to have your own host machine in Azure and then run as many VMs on that host as you want. So there are many different ways that you can make your dollar go further in Azure by leveraging these flexible pricing options. One thing that I do want to focus on for SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine is that Azure Hybrid Benefit, because this is super common for our customers to leverage. And what's great about Azure Hybrid Benefit is you already have usually made investments in software assurance on-prem, especially if you're migrating data centers up into the cloud. There's no reason why you can't leverage that investment. And you get some great benefits when you take that benefit to Azure, when you take that licensing to Azure. So first of all, when you have software assurance on Azure virtual machines, like I said, that entitles you to run those same cores in Azure if you like, just by leveraging the Azure Hybrid Benefit, but it also gives you some additional HRDR benefits as well. So if you are running all in Azure, say you have an availability group and all the nodes are in Azure, you license the first primary VM, but then you are entitled to 2 additional passive nodes for that availability group. So you can have one passive node for HA, for high availability. So that would usually be, if you're using an availability group, that would be like a synchronous replica. And then you can have an additional passive secondary for disaster recovery. So that would usually be an asynchronous replica. So you have to pay for and license the first VM, but the other 2, the SQL Server licensing, is part of your SA benefits, and you only have to pay compute for those 2 VMs. So that's a great benefit that you get when you're using Azure Hybrid Benefit. Similarly, if you want to do like a hybrid HRDR approach where your primary is on-prem, you are still entitled to that passive secondary for HA and the passive secondary for DR, but then you can also get an additional passive disaster recovery node in Azure. So you can stretch that availability group up into Azure with an additional DR node. And all of this is built into your licensing agreement if you have software assurance. So this is a great way to leverage that on-prem investment and get some additional HRDR nodes for free. Another great benefit that I mentioned is free extended security updates when you run your SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine. So I hope that most of you have migrated off of SQL Server 2008 R2 because, of course, it's been out of support for 2 years now. So we really hope that you're modernizing. But if you're still in the process of modernizing and you haven't been able to certify your applications on newer versions of SQL Server yet, the nice thing about running in Azure is we give you the free extended security updates for 3 years if you run in Azure. So this allows you to get security updates if for some reason a security update is released and you need that patch. you will have access to it. If you were to get this on-prem, it costs 75% of the licensing cost of SQL Server to buy this on-prem. So this is a really great cost-saving benefit when you run your SQL Server in Azure. So these are just some of the options that you get when you've made an investment in SQL Server on-prem and you decide that you want to lift and shift that into Azure SQL VM. We've got some great options for you. This is all mostly about pricing, but I'm sure a lot of you are DBAs and you're probably wondering, what is it like to manage my SQL Server in an Azure virtual machine? How is it different? How is it the same? So I'm going to start handing this over to Aditya so he can talk to you more about what it's like to run your SQL Server in Azure virtual machine. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And while you start sharing, I'll just give you my thoughts about SQL Server and Azure virtual machine. The great thing about it is just SQL Server. It is already what you're used to using. There is not that much that's different. But what we try to do is make it as easy as possible for you to manage SQL Server, because we are Microsoft and we know how to manage SQL Server better than anyone else. So we're trying to provide you with the best services and value add that you can get for making it easier for you to run SQL Server in Azure. So with that, I'll hand it over to Aditya.
Awesome. Wow. That's a great introduction, Pam, and I have to leave.
Thanks, Aditya. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. Take it over.
Yeah. So I hope everyone can see my screen, right?
Yes, we see your screen.
Awesome. So as Pam mentioned, it's just that SQL Server that you would be running in Azure Cloud as a virtual machine. Now, how is there any difference? How to exactly deploy my SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machine? It is different per se. The only thing that is different is you might need to understand the Azure infrastructure part of it. So it's your SQL Server, add the Azure infrastructure part of it. Now, if you try to combine these two, there you have it. It's that SQL Server that you are running every time. So let me see. Yeah. So to start with, the first thing that you need is compute, right? So for that, first, Azure has multiple options. You have these memory optimized. We released new versions of MSV2, MDSV2. You have the general purpose and confidential computing virtual machines. You have storage optimized virtual machines. But there are other virtual machines too, like DSV2, where they are purpose built for different things. But because we know how SQL Server runs, we are from the product group, we kind of tested what is that VM that is most suited for SQL Server workloads. We have done extensive tests, and that's where the sprinkles come. So EDS v4 is our favorite series. Why is that our favorite series? Let's take a look. So EDS v4 series is a kind of series where you have the best memory to core ratio. What is that? If I double click on that, you have one core, and we kind of see that 1:8 is the proper ratio that you might need to have to run a proper SQL Server workload. And EDS v4 is a series which has that memory to core ratio perfectly aligned. And EDS v4 is a series where you have the local cache, which is higher, and it has the best throughput out of it. And the remote storage. Let me pause and say what exactly remote storage is. As I said, you have compute, you have storage also. In storage, there is a storage which is locally attached, and there is a storage which is remotely over there, which essentially is in on-prem world. How do you see the SAN and directly attached storage? It's something like that. So you have this remote storage out there. We call that remote storage is of different flavors. Please join the session day after tomorrow, I guess, where we do talk extremely deep on what exactly that storage looks like. So there is this remote storage and this local storage. Now, EDS v4 is a VM which has that throughput towards that storage also better. So we do have caps because Azure is a public cloud. We do have caps at VM level. We do have caps at the disk level and everything. So when we when we tested, we saw that EDS v4 is one series where you have a general SQL Server workloads that can go pretty well. Now, there could be few workloads which are very, very high OLTP in nature, which has lots and lots of users, transactions per second that needs to go through, and then there is a demand of a huge, high CPU cycles. So for those kind of workloads, we do recommend going for M series. M series is a memory optimized series where most of our, let's say 192 core, I need to get 192 cores or 128 cores. So if you are having that higher demand of cores and OLTP, mission critical OLTP workloads, we do recommend M series. M series has those flavors. And lastly, DSV2 series. There is those people who wants to run very high workloads, and there will be few people who would just want a 8-core or 4-core machine. For them, who generally like SQL Server is just out there to holding few records and all that, we do recommend DSV2 series, which is the cheapest offer that we have. But in general, if someone wants to run a workload which is around 16 to 64 core or 16 to 96 core workload, we do recommend going for EDS v4 series. Sprinkles coming, yes. So EDS v4 series is our favorite series, as we said. So the next, now we sorted what is the series, like EDS v4, we got it. Now we also in this, when I started talking, I said it is nothing different. It is just that you have the same SQL Server with the Azure infrastructure, right? So what we try, this is my job day in, day out, is to make sure how to blend these two and make our customers' life easy. In that point, one of the first place that we hit is marketplace images. So what is a marketplace image? For starters, the marketplace is the marketplace. You go in Azure, you browse a SQL Server image, and you say, hey, deploy. When you do that, so you go to Azure, which is the Azure cloud, and you are asking SQL Server to deploy. What we are doing on top of it is we are giving you the SQL Server settings when you deploy that virtual machine, where you can configure all the best practices that a DBA does. Like we don't want 1433 port, we want some 7866 port. We do want mixed authentication, not just the Windows authentication. We want to configure the license of our own. We want to configure automated backups. We want to configure. I'm going to talk all these features in detail in coming slides, but we do make sure that you can configure your SQL Server with all the best practices way forward while you're deploying your SQL Server. Now, there are good amount of enhancements coming for this too. Please look out for this space. Please look out for our blogs around this. We are really keeping our efforts to make this marketplace images as much DBA friendly as possible. I'm a DBA in my past life, and I do know what exactly it means configuring a SQL Server with best practices. So we are working on making it, making this SQL Server settings with all the bells and whistles that a normal DBA really wishes. So once you configure it, you can still download this template, ARM template, and you can use it for the automation too. So that is the marketplace images. Now, if you see in this marketplace images, there is this, I spoke about all this, but I didn't speak about the storage because I want to double click on that storage. Again, coming back to the notion that I started with, which is it is the same SQL Server, but you are running with Azure infrastructure. Now, as I just mentioned how to choose and what to choose from the compute point, let me talk how to configure a storage for a proper for a best practices and a well-performed SQL Server. So if you see there is a storage configuration. So how generally the storage configuration should look like? In our on-prem world, you would see you would see your SAN administrator carving out your disk and giving it to you. But in Azure, because it is remote storage, what you need to do is you might need to create storage pools. Let me tell you why it's storage pools, right? So Azure comes with different flavors of storage. Please, I'm touching the surface of this. Please go on for the storage deep dive of the day after tomorrow, where Pam and David kind of go explain pretty in depth. So where the thing is, you have different flavors of disk. You have P30 disk, P40 disk. These are called premium disks. The number changes because of the capacity of that disk. So you have this disk. Now, let's say you want to configure a 8 terabytes storage. Either you can pick a 8 terabytes sized disk, which is P80, I guess, or what you can do is get for 8 P30 disks and make a storage pool out of it and deploy it into the SQL Server, into that VM. Now, what would this bring? One, it will bring more throughput because you're building a RAID array, essentially a RAID on top of this eight drives that you pulled, and you're also getting the space. Now, configuring storage pool is kind of tricky. If you see the GIF that is playing itself is like 5 seconds, which essentially means we fast forwarded it, and it's kind of tricky. If you don't get it right, it's very pain to really get it sorted. So we understood that pain. So what we did is in the same marketplace images, when you see, where you saw the storage configuration, if you double click it, you would see this one, this slide. What is this? This is the configure storage option that you would have when you double click that storage configuration. Here, if you see, I have number of disks, I have the type of disk, what is the size of the disk, what type of disk I want to configure. Ultimately, the questions that I'm asking you here is to, hey, please give me the number of disks. Please give me the number of disks for log. Please give me number of disks for data. Once you give me those, I will go ahead and configure storage pool for you with the type of disk and throughput that you mentioned. Isn't that exciting? So we kind of do automate all this for you. So now today, this is you can see this experience when you're provisioning it. So when you're provisioning your SQL Server via marketplace image, if I go back, if you click this storage and change configuration, you would find this screen where you can configure the storage pools. Also, if you observe, there is this red box which says the desired performance might not be reached due to maximum virtual machine disk performance. So as I mentioned, every virtual machine comes with its own limitations, as in, so EDS v4 will have the max throughput at a level, P30s will have a max throughput at a level. So we kind of by the choices that you make, we kind of intelligently understand, hey, is that the right choice? Is he getting the right throughput or not? And we display the information such that we help you configure the right configuration that is needed for that storage pool. So we are enhancing that intelligence every day with the new VMs coming in, with the new storage coming in. We are working on enhancing that experience. Now, I deployed SQL Server. I chose this computer. I chose the compute option. I chose the storage that I wanted. I used the marketplace image. Now I have SQL Server in virtual machine. So how should I manage it? Using your favorite tools, SSMS, Azure Data Studio, PowerShell. Like, use the tools that you like. And in addition, we are giving you a DBA for when you run Azure virtual machines. What I mean we are giving you a DBA is there is this super cool tool called SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. So what does SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension is a piece of software that if you register, it will come and deploy into your VMs. And what it would do is it would empower all the manageability tasks to be automated for you. I'm saying, maybe I overpromised here. I should not say all. There are so many. Most of the manageability tasks that a DBA does are kind of managed by SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. So SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension is kind of a free service that a customer gets for running SQL Server on Azure virtual machines. What it does like all this, like you can, once you have a SQL Server IaaS Agent, I'm going to demo that. I'm going to show what exactly it means, all that stuff in a bit. But the thing that you might need to understand is with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, you get the view, simple management view. What exactly that I mean is, in Azure, you have different teams. Let's say you are a big enterprise, you have different teams. All the teams are deploying SQL servers of their own, and you have deployed a test machine way long back and you don't know where it is, all that. Now, if I want to see all of this at one place, SQL Server virtual machines too. We do give you all of your SQL virtual machines, the version that they are running, and all that, and the license type that it is in, all that in single pane. That is a huge management. So if I were a DBA previously, what I used to do is I used to tag that saying hashtag database or hashtag SQL Server. No need. You just have SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. Everything comes in a single view. We do give, because with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, we just pushed Security Center. Security Center actually takes most of your vulnerabilities and gives you the best advice for the SQL injections, vulnerability assessments, etc. Now, let me go in deep of each and every, what all other features that you get with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. The first one, as I mentioned, this storage best practices, that's a big one because there are many instances where we work with our customers where they would go and try to configure storage in a different way, and they do pay more and they do get less performance. So I do request you to follow the storage best practices. We will drop few links after this. I'm sure this slide will be given. There are links here. David essentially did a great work in writing a huge best practices list, and it's available in the documentation. I do recommend you folks to go follow those whenever you have chance. Now, that is one. There is one other interesting feature in SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, which is automatic security patching, which essentially means if you turn on this automated patching, what happens is all the critical GDR security patches will automatically come, and on the schedule that you define, we'll have we will patch your SQL Server automatically. Now, this is only security patches. Let me be very clear. This doesn't include the service packs or CUs yet. So it is only restricted to the security patches. The other thing, as I was just mentioning, this is one feature that we worked with our security team pretty much to bring all the security, the Azure security goodness to SQL Server. So there are many rules that we run as part of Security Center. I do wish you go try that, where you go see what are the vulnerability assessment aspects, what are the different advanced threat protection aspects, and you can go and remediate then and there. So it's a pretty cool feature. Whoever has this high security concerns and the SQL injection, all those, most of us as DBS would have those. We are giving this via SQL VM. And as I mentioned, there are other features with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, but one of the main feature that I do advocate our customers to really use SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension is the license management. Why license management? Pam was mentioning before, right? There is this Azure hybrid benefit. If you come with the software assurance, Azure hybrid benefit would be applied to you, and you have so many offers that, as she explained just before. Now, how do you use those offers? How do you say to Azure that you are in Azure hybrid benefit? The way you tell to Azure you are in Azure hybrid benefit is using the license management. The way you tell to Azure that you want to use this machine as a HRDR, and you know that this is a HRDR where you are using only for disaster recovery purposes, and you don't want that to get built, the way you tell is by going to license management and clicking the right license. But if you do this, the biggest thing that happens is you need not really work extra for making yourselves compliant about your licensing and everything as a separate aspect. Once you deploy SQL VM, we are giving you compliance then and there. So while it would be a bookkeeping stuff, if it really hits, it's a very painful task to do. Compliance is a serious thing, and going into audits and answering all the questions, this thing would really make that all that easy. And lastly, backups. Backups are, yes, I should not be saying this out loud. Everyone know it. Backups are important, and we do understand that. We do understand that pretty much, and we would want to give you the capability of taking backups automatically using our portal. So this one in the backend uses the managed backup, where now what you can do is you can essentially take the backup to an URL and that is a blob store. From there either you can pull it to another region and restore it, or use it for any other purpose. Your backups are safe in a Azure cloud. So which is again a high business continuity aspect that we are giving you here. Now, what is the call out, right? All we are doing till now, whatever I have mentioned, everything you get just because you are running SQL Server on Azure virtual machines. We know we are so passionate about towards the product of SQL Server, and we want that SQL Server to be running extremely performant wherever you deploy. And hence, we came up with all these features such that you do concentrate on what exactly is more important, the performance aspects of it, the availability aspects of it. And we are here to guide you as much as possible. We are here to make sure that most of the mundane tasks are automate it, give the ability of automation for you. Now, I will show you, I will tell you quickly, there is one other aspect around this SQL Agent Extension, that is SQL Agent Extension that I mentioned, the piece of software, the cool software that I mentioned, the DBA himself comes in two modes. It is lightweight mode and full mode. Lightweight mode is for people who just want to do license management and nothing. So you got it card, you know how to take all this. You are not really looking for any other automation other than license management. That is the version, lightweight version for you. There is the full version. Full version, you might need to, once you deploy lightweight version, you might need to change it to full version. That full version comes with all these bells and whistles that I mentioned: automated backup, security patching, the security center, all that. So that's pretty much is what SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension theoretically. Let's see what is it in action. Come on. Are we good? Doing good on time?
Yes, we are doing good on time. Yeah, you're fine. You've got
awesome.
Another 10 minutes or so.
Awesome. Cool. So as I said, let me quickly walk through whatever I said and into Azure Portal, right? So as I mentioned, when you come to Azure Portal, you see if you go to search and if you type SQL virtual machines, you have a blade dedicated only for you called SQL virtual machines. And maybe, yeah. So that SQL virtual, here in this, you can see all the list of virtual machines that you might need, that you have right now, with their names, the resource groups, which resource groups it is in, the license it is, the version, the edition, all parts of it. You have all parts of it straight from this view. You can either export this, you can query this using ARG, etc. So you can play with that using the SQL virtual machines. Now, if I go and click one of the SQL virtual machine, what happens is this is the blade that I'm talking about, SQL virtual machine blade. Now this blade, I do like the overview point of SQL virtual machine also because of this graph, because this graph tells me what is the size of each and every drive that I have. I need not go log in and look at it. But today, this is applicable only if you come via marketplace image. That's the small captcha. Else, if you come via marketplace image, this is a good graph to have. That is one. The second, the important thing that I'm talking about till now is the license management, right? So in the license management, as I mentioned, you can go from pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go is not the Azure hybrid benefit version. We bill you per minute or per hour, and we'll say, hey, this is how much you used and all that. So that is for pay-as-you-go. You can change it to Azure hybrid benefit. When you change it to Azure hybrid benefit, you might need to attest that you have software assurance, and lastly, the HRDR option that I just mentioned. That is one. The other thing that is like most of the people are confused is edition. You can change the edition here, but it won't be reflected in your machine. You might need to change your edition in the machine and change here. So then you would ask me, like, then why is this even here? The reason why this is here is to make sure that your billing, let's say you change from standard to enterprise and you want to reflect that billing. To reflect that billing, you might need to really change the edition here. That's what the edition component is all about. And once you configure data and log storage pools in the marketplace image, you have this storage config where you can extend your drives directly from here. But the big cool thing about this is here also, if you see, we do give you the intelligence options, like saying, hey, you know what? You can't add more disks. Hey, you know what? Add this way. Or if you add this many disks, this is the throughput that you would be getting. All that niceness will be there if you expand it, if you expand storage directly from here. And the next is patching. As I mentioned, you can patch. This is pure GDR security patches, and all it. You can pick a schedule and you can have your patching done. Backups, the same. Here we take your entire instance backups into the storage account. Either you can configure your backup schedule, or we will take your backups based on the log growth. Based on the log growth, we'll try to assess how much log growth is it the right time, all that, and we do go and configure the backups. You can enable system databases or not. It's completely up to you. So there is this high availability stuff I'm not touching here. So Rajesh is going to take more about it, talk more about it. This is the security configuration, right? So if you want to change your port from 1433 to some other thing, you can change here, and you can enable SQL authentication directly from here. And lastly, this is the security center that I'm talking about. Security center will tell you the recommendation, the security alerts, the findings it has, and you can go and say, hey, SQL Server, these are found, what should I do? Okay, then you can say, this is the master. Okay, there are different types of benchmarks that we do, and we can say remediate or not remediate directly from here. So we will tell you how we got this, what is the query that we use, all that. So and now I told you, now I teased you on all this goodness. The way you can enable SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension is either by running the CLI command that we have in the deck. I can give it to you. Or if you are like me, who is smart, which is you can go click this automatic SQL Server VM registration and pick the subscription and register. What it will do is it will go register all your future SQL Server virtual machines also whenever you deploy. So the reason why I'm saying you're smart like me is because this is the first feature I released in Microsoft, so I'm super excited about this. This is my baby. So, yeah. So I don't leave a chance wherever I can say. So that's pretty much about how you deploy, manage SQL servers in virtual machines. And lastly, before I give it to Rajesh, I would say, please do make sure that you have SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension at least in lightweight mode, because it is the license management is the biggest thing, and I would really care about doing the full mode too, because we are working continuously to make sure all the manageability aspects of DBA becomes easy. And lastly, everything you can turn on. It's not that we are doing it for you. We are giving the tool for you where you can turn on automated backups, where you can turn on automated patching. The power is still with you, and hence we call this as IaaS++. So yeah, that's pretty much about it.
The best part is it's all free.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah,
that was awesome, Aditya. Yeah, thanks
a lot, everyone. Rajesh, take it away.
All right, yeah, let me quickly share my screen. Hope you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, that awesome skate park came out. Yep, now we see your PowerPoint. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So we'll get started. Slightly switching gears, but we'll still be in the realm of Azure SQL VMs. Thanks, Pam. Pam covered the entire overview of what you can do with Azure SQL VMs. the various options, the big picture of what Azure and where Azure SQL VMs fit in. And what Aditya was doing is he was zooming in into Azure SQL VMs. He was getting into what's the value prop with SQL VMs. How are we trying to make the life of a DBA simple? I think, which is again the core message is, end of the day, it's your own SQL Server that runs everywhere. It's the same SQL engine that runs on-prem. It's the same SQL engine that runs in SQL VM. Pretty much that's it, right? It's like you have your VMs on-prem, you have your VMs in Azure. Other than the underlying infrastructure, it's still the same VM. So what Aditya was doing was he was getting into the Azure SQL VM, and then he was giving it, what do we do around the SQL VM? Like IaaS extension is one good value add. Because it's free, we give you a lot of manageability benefits to you. We try to take some automation, give you some kind of automation so that the life of a DBA becomes much more simpler. And what the key message that we also want to pass across is we are continuously investing in the IaaS extensions. So you might see features that are in progress. You might see features that are evolving. We are constantly listening to customer feedback. And then as we hear feedback, we are trying to add those features back into extension. So think of this as one evolving way where we try to take the management overhead, because now that you're in Azure infrastructure, we want to leverage that. We want to give you some value added benefits on top of that. So with that, let me quickly cover for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll talk about HRDR. It is high availability and disaster recovery. So what we are going to do is we'll quickly touch upon some basic concepts. None of this should be new to you. You might be dealing with it for years altogether. We'll quickly touch upon it. Then we'll get into what are the options of running SQL, what are the HRDR options in SQL VM, compare a couple of options, and then I'll get into those details, and then also point you to a documentation where we give prescriptive guidance on what's the best practices of HRDR, right? Okay, so stepping back and then trying to understand HRDR, HA stands for high availability. End of the day, think of this as, hey, do you have redundancy in place? Are you prepared to for any planned or unplanned events? At the end of the day, as the name suggests, you want your database or your application to be available almost all of the time. So you want to have architect your application, design your application with a corresponding SQL Server database in the backend for Azure SQL VM. And then you want to make sure that those systems are highly available no matter what. And in the context of Azure SQL VMs, it still applies. It's even more important where you understand what are the nuances between what are the nuances of running SQL VMs in Azure, because even in Azure, you end up scenarios like there are planned maintenance, there are unplanned hardware issues like natural disasters that happen. So you have to be well prepared to understand, hey, what are the mechanisms that I have in place to handle a scenario wherein a data center is, there's an outage at the data center, or a particular zone in a region is completely out. And this happens, right? I mean, life happens, and then you have to be prepared for all of these things. And this is something not new. You have been doing it on-prem. That's how you have been making sure that all your systems are highly available in your on-prem, and you extend those concepts into Azure. And then I will touch upon a couple of areas where the infrastructure gives you some out-of-the-box features, but then on top of it, since it's infrastructure as a service, so the onus is on customer as you to make sure that these are architected and designed well. And in terms of disaster recovery, this is again in the event of an unexpected disaster where an entire region gets wiped out, you don't have connectivity, a big natural disaster that's impacting a whole region. Typically, you plan for a disaster region which is geographically well dispersed enough, where it's shielded from all the activity that's happening on the primary region, and then you bring your systems up online on the disaster recovery. And obviously, with disaster recovery, it's always in an asynchronous mode, which is understandable because at the end of the day, there is physics involved, right? You obviously cannot travel faster than light. So you obviously will end up in a scenario where there is some amount of data loss. And the idea is you pick a disaster recovery region and you pick a technology of your choice, which minimizes the amount of data loss. But we do understand that there are events that happen which are outside our control. And that's about HA and DR. One key message towards the end of the slide is, these are all related concepts, like HA and DR are related concepts, but they're not the same. As you might have heard in this explanation, there are two different things. And what SQL Server does is, SQL Server has a bunch of technologies that helps you to meet both your HA and DR needs. And then I also want to quickly touch upon one more concept. If you say, this is something that should not be new. You might have been heard about these terms numerous times. The first one is recovery time objective. This is RTO, which tells you the amount of downtime that's incurred when a disaster happens. It could be a disaster or it could be an availability blip. Let's say Azure platform is doing a planned maintenance update. It takes a few seconds, but may not be acceptable for your need. and then you say, hey, this is an event that's impacting my availability, and then how much time does it take for you to recover after that event happens. That's all about the recovery time objective. And then RPO is for the lost data, which is the amount of data loss that's incurred when an event happens. And typically what everybody as a DBA or someone who is managing the infrastructure on your primary side, you always want to achieve a scenario where the RPO is absolutely zero for high availability, because you cannot deal into a situation where you land into data loss scenarios in your primary HA regions. But for DR regions, it's understandable. You definitely want it to be shielded far enough from primary. So obviously you get into that data loss scenarios, but you're well prepared. Like in the event where your primary region goes down, you get your systems back up and running in a disaster recovery. So that's well better than not having the systems up and running as well. So it's always a trade-off that you do on the disaster recovery side. With that, let me quickly touch upon two Azure concepts. The availability options for Azure SQL VMs. Azure exposes three options. I haven't included the third option, which is for VM skill sets. May not be relevant for the topic that we are discussing. That's for stateless VMs that you want to manage at scale. So if you leave that option aside, there are two primary options that you deal with. Like out of the box, Azure infrastructure gives you availability sets. These are very unique to Azure. Not any other public cloud has this. Azure is the only one which offers availability sets. And what they do is they come with an SLA. Like if you put in a couple of VMs in an availability set, you are guaranteed that you get a SLA of 99.95% of connectivity. Like you are able to connect to one of those VMs at 99.95% of the time. And what it does is there's two notions that it takes into exposes two logical constructs. One is fault domain and update domains. So when you think of fault domain, think of this as the diagram here shows. Think of this as a rack, a bunch of servers in a rack, and then all of them sharing, let's say, a top of rack switch. So if the top of rack switch goes down, then all the VMs on all the servers and all the VMs on that rack goes down. So think of this as fault tolerance at the rack level. So when we place a couple of VMs in a fault domain in an availability set, we make sure that we place them spread it across in multiple fault domains so that we avoid a single point of failure. So that's one advantage that we do. And in terms of update domains, this is for the Azure infrastructure. So when we do updates, the infrastructure, what it does behind the scenes is it does something called as an UD walk. And what we do by UD walk is we try to update systems one update domain at a time. So that way we don't take all the VMs in an availability set at the same time. Again, this is going back to that one anchoring point is avoiding single point of failure. So this is guaranteed out of the box, wherein you place a couple of VMs in an availability set. We ensure that they are spread across in multiple fault domains and multiple update domains. That way the availability is always high. On the right-hand side is availability zones. This is an industry standard. You might have heard this in other compute clouds. The concept is very easy because there is physical nature involved in it. The SLA is very high. We offer 99.99% of SLA, 4 nines of SLA, which is great in Azure. And then as the diagram here shows, you have physically dispersed data centers. It is all within a region in understandable, like less than 100 to 150 miles. They're close to each other. Each one has its own power supply, cooling, or network. So that way, any events that happens in a particular zone, the other two zones are absolutely not impacted by it. And the way to think about zones is think of them as isolated update domains and fault domains. So in one particular zone, you will have your fault domains and update domains, and then these are isolated. So you have that physical distance between each of those zones. So and that way, that gives you a higher level of availability. It does come in with an extra latency, but it's worth the latency if you are architecting systems for high availability. One key message for both availability sets and zones is Azure guarantees the availability only when you replicate the VMs, when you have replicated VMs. And what do you mean by replicated VMs is you need to have at least 2 or more VMs doing the same function. So that way, even if one of the VM goes down, you still have connectivity to the second VM. And so if you boil this down to SQL Server and Azure VMs, so the responsibility on customer to make sure that the SQL Azure VMs are in a way that they are synchronous among these two, they're synchronous across those two VMs. So that way, if one of them goes down, the other one will take over. And we'll get into those concepts in a bit. And if you think about the HRDR technologies for Azure SQL VM, one key theme that I think we all want to pass across right from, I think, right, we have started from Pam and Aditya is, end of the day, it's no different than on-premise. I mean, it's your same SQL Server. So all your concepts around HRDR, all your compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, any DR requirements, everything that you have been doing on-premise still applies in Azure VMs. Yes, there are some nuances in terms of the infrastructure. It does bring in its own wrinkles, as you saw in terms of the availability group and availability options. You might also see it in terms of storage configuration. But leaving those big things aside, end of the day, it's still the same SQL Server that you have been managing on-prem. So if you think about all the HRDR technologies that we offer, AGs works on SQL VMs. They have been around since SQL 2012. FCIs, they have been around since 2000 and 2005 days. So they are still, you can still configure FCI in Azure SQL VMs. Lock shipping, which is again a tried and tested method. Backup restore, this is for those set of customers who say, hey, I don't want to invest in a passive or a secondary replica. I still want to go with the traditional backup and restore. Well and good, you still have that option. And also the Azure only option, which is the Azure Site Recovery. This is a fully managed PaaS service, which is catering to all your DR needs. And Azure Site Recovery does two things. The two use cases that Azure Site Recovery does is you could have your primary on-prem and think of Azure as your DR region. Azure Site Recovery works just fine with that. Or in the other case where you say, hey, I'm all up in Azure. I have a bunch of SQL VMs. I'm in a region 1, but I want to use region 2 as my DR. ASR can do that as well. So these are two primary use cases that ASR deals with. It's a fully managed PaaS service. And then if you look on the right side, the arrows, which are all pointing down, the idea here is we want to give you an information around, if you pick on, if you try to pivot this on RPO and RTO, obviously AG has the highest RPO and the highest RTO. As you go down the list, you get into that higher RPO and higher RTO. And this is again a choice that you have to make depending on how you want to architect your systems. What are the SLAs that you have to meet for your business application? Because end of the day, it all starts with the conversation at the application side. Like you sit with the business, you understand, hey, what is the SLA that I have to meet for the application, and then for the database, and then you architect these systems, because the design choices that you do for SQL Server HA will be set in force by the SLAs for the application, and then you make sure that you have the redundancy and the HA or DR that's planned on the database layer. And then on towards the right hand side, the last arrow that's talking about is the we also wanted to give you a view of, hey, what is the technology that's ideal for HRDR? And then as you go down the list, as you can see, AG is something which is the flagship technology. It does both HRDR. You don't have to deal with any of the storage replication complexity that typically happens in FCI if you have to deal it for DR. So as you go down the list, you start from HA, something that's well suited for HA and DR, and you go down the list, you get into an option that's primarily geared for DR needs. Right.
Hey,
so with that, yep. Yes, Pat.
Before you move on, it might be a good time to just call out a couple of questions. I answered one in the chat. Sure. Nero had been asking about, what is there anything that's available on-prem that's not available in Azure for HADR? I think you covered this already. I couldn't think of anything that you can't do in Azure that you can do on-prem. I wasn't sure if.
No, that's you're right, Pam. Yeah, you're right there. I mean, there are some nuances around with the kind of storage that you do on-prem versus what you do Azure. But at the Uber level, all the options that you have on-prem are pretty much applicable in Azure as well.
Yeah, another great question that came in was, how do you test your DR config in Azure? Do we have any good advice? I mean, I guess you test it the same way you would on-prem, right? You build yourself a dev system and
exactly. You have to follow your DR drills wherein I mean, I've seen it. I've been working in customer sites for a customer site, and I've seen customers going through this DR drill. They schedule it, and some customers also are regulated, which means they have a compliance requirement to meet a DR drill. So they have to do it a couple of times in a year, or maybe once in every quarter, and then they make sure that the DR systems is up and running. They also make changes on the DR side and wait for the changes to replicate on the primary. So this is all compliance requirement. One good thing, another thing which is again relevant at this point, is also on the Azure Site Recovery. Again, the RPO and RTO is high, but if you choose that option, the Azure Site Recovery also has an option where you can do a test DR plan. So it gives you an option where you can do a test DR. It spins up the whole infra. So wherein all the resources are provisioned in your network, everything gets spinned up. You can test, you can log into those VMs, make sure the data is you're seeing the data that you are expecting to see, and then you can tear down the whole test infrastructure. So that's one way that which is a neat way of testing the DR before doing the actual DR.
Yeah, that's very cool. Awesome.
Rajesh, what's interesting about those two questions is if you take them together, there are things that you worry, and something I'd like for you to comment on. There's things that you worry about less in the cloud than you do on-prem.
Yep.
From a high availability disaster recovery perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. Yeah. Okay.
No. I'm just interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because on the, I mean, typically if a server or a, let's say a physical server goes down, then you have to go, data personnel have to go get involved and then physically go in and handle that. But what David is trying to get towards is, in the Azure side, you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. If there is a bad hardware, if there is there's a bad node that we encounter, we move your VMs to a healthy node automatically for you. And this happens all the time. I mean, and you don't even notice that all of this is happening under the hood, because if you think of Azure infrastructure as a whole, we have a fleet of servers that we manage across 50 odd regions. So we have all the automations, all the monitoring, all the health and heartbeats that we get from the node. And we do it all the time. So we redeploy the VMs into a healthy node. We rotate the VM. I mean, we make sure that if any infrastructure is getting out to a point where it needs to be retired, we just switch it out of the rotation. We bring in new hardware, and all of this happens all the time. So you don't have to worry about it. All of this is taken care automatically for you. The only thing that you have to worry about is, on top of the physical infrastructure, for all the Azure SQL VMs, do you have a HRDR technology which can meet your SLA needs in terms of RPO and RTO?
That's awesome.
All right, perfect. All right.
Thanks.
So with that, I'll quickly touch upon this slide, and then I'll hand it to David, who has a couple of good demos on the other Azure stuff. So we just want to compare two always-on options. One is availability groups, which is again a flagship product, does both HRDR. The other one is FCI. I won't go down every line item here, but the key message is you have it. I mean, you have a choice between availability groups and failover cluster instances. We typically tend to hear customers where most of the customers do adopt AGs because it's more flexible. You don't have to deal with the storage. Every VM gets its own storage, so you don't have to deal with the shared storage complexities that you typically have in a public cloud. But nevertheless, you have an option to choose between AGs and failover cluster instances. Both of them work on editions, enterprise and standard. One is at a database level, AG works at a granularity of database, FCAs work at a granularity of an instance. The duration of failover on the AG side is for the DB to come online, but on an instance, as you can imagine, it does require a SQL Server restart. So which means when you fail over from primary to secondary, on the secondary instances, the SQL Server instance is actually coming up online. So once the service comes online, then your DB becomes online. In terms of benefits, AG has the passive secondary replica benefits, wherein you can offload your management operations, just like backup or DBCs, CheckDB. You could run it on your passive secondaries, which is not the case with FCIs. In terms of compute cost, AG does come in with an additional couple of threads for each database. One is for log capture, the other one is log thread, and there are a bunch of shared threads as well. So it's not that we don't do a shared thread management in AG. We have optimized this to the point that AG works well, scales up to your needs as well. And then for the licensing benefits, as I think Pam was talking about, when you run SQL Server on Azure, or if you do on-prem, and if you have a passive HA and a passive DR replica, your SA benefits cover the licensing for those cores as well. So you just pay for your primary, your HA passive, and the DR replica comes in for free. And in terms of connectivity, both VNN and DNN, all the options work for both AGs and FCI. So end of the day, the message is the choice, as in with infrastructure as a service. It gives you the control which you all want. So you obviously get into that juncture where you have to decide between AG and FCIs. It's up to you. We highly recommend starting with AGs, and if it doesn't meet your requirements, you always can fall back to FCIs or the ones which have a higher RPO and RTO. With that, I think the last slide that I want to cover is, I mean, folks here like Pam, David, Aditya, they have done a bunch of heavy lifting in terms of cleaning up the documentation. You might have seen this in various instances in the past, in all the public facing demos that we have been calling out. And the reason is being we have done a lot of work to make sure that we give you prescriptive guidance. So you will see that in every section of SQL VM. I'm just highlighting SQL HRDR part. We have where we have prescriptive guidance on how much, what's the particular parameter that's of interest to you, and what's the value that you have to set. So please go and leverage that, and make sure you architect your SQL VMs to meet your HRDR needs. With that, I think I'll pass it back to David.
Excellent.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, David. We got about 8 minutes left. So
Okay,
take us home.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. Other Azure Awesome Sauce. And let me just let everybody know, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. We decided not to reserve the 15 minutes for questions. We'll just answer them in the chat as we go. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm covering this, and then we're going to do a quick demo.
Oh,
so
wait, actually, I'm not seeing your screen, David. I'm not. I was seeing Rajesh's screen.
Yeah, that was my screen.
All right. Hold on. Not sure what happened there. We'll try this one more time.
You might have had to stop sharing before you could start sharing.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So go for it. And why don't you just go? You can go straight to the demo. We can skip the awesome sauce slide if you
share. How's that? Is it working yet?
Yeah, there you go. Now I see it.
Yes.
The other awesome tools in Azure.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I think we covered a couple of these. I think we covered site recovery. So I'll just touch on that. Azure Security Center. This is one of my favorite solutions in Azure, really because it's such an awesome pane of glass. And I know that we throw that term around a lot, but there's a whole lot that you get in terms of like regulatory compliance, security scores, alerting, security reports, and Azure Defender. From a SQL perspective, you get a lot of protection around SQL injection, best practices around security recommendations, and defense in depth. So it's really evolving, and I definitely recommend that you leverage that. Azure Backup, it's just simple. Like it just aims to be a very simple method to back up any type of data and then recover it to where you need it. I mean, you can say like at the virtual machine level, or restore what's needed at that level, or even get to a database scope. So there's a whole lot that you can do at that level. I think we've already touched on site recovery, but really it's essentially a very robust replication technology. And the key scenario here is from a recoverability, business continuity, and disaster recovery perspective, is being able to replicate between regions and on-prem to the cloud, and then have your applications be able to run in a secondary location if there's an issue. Then we're going to get to Perf Insights, and this is a key one. I'm going to spend a little more time here. This is a diagnostic tool, and I would recommend running it. And so first, before you call support, we definitely recommend running Perf Insights. But it also is a great summary tool for your environment as well as for storage. And what it does is it helps summarize your performance and storage information, and it can be run on the VM or through the Azure Portal. And one of the best capabilities is the HTML report that it produces, and it makes it really easy to summarize what's going on the machine. So there's some switches that you have. You can do like a quick performance analysis, benchmarking. You can do like an Azure file analysis. You can also do an advanced scenario where you have different switches depending on the scenario that you're looking at. So what I'm going to do is, let's see if I can go to the next screen. All right, so I'm going to show you, and I have my VM up already. And do you see my VM here?
I see how to use Perf Insights in Azure.
Okay, perfect. That's on my VM. So okay, so you're going to want to go to this link, and then up top you'll see this Perf Insights. Just click that. Just Google Bing Perf Insights in Azure. This will come up, and when you click this link, then you'll get this tab to how to download it. Okay. Now, when you download it, this is running the tool on the machine itself. All you have to do is go to the download that it's in. And in this case, I'm running Perf Insights. I'm doing an advanced scenario. I'm running some extended scenarios. These are some of the switches that you can do. And I'm saying for like 300 seconds, run this, do a collection, and then produce the results. There's a number of switches that you have. It's all listed in the documentation. So if I go down here to the documentation, what kind of information is collected by Perf Insights? It depends on the switch that you're giving it. So in this case, I'm doing an advanced performance analysis. we're checking off most everything here. The only thing I'm not doing in this advanced performance analysis is there's no reason to do a network level trace. That would only be done with the Azure file scenario, and then like running disk speed, that's only done with the benchmark. Otherwise, advanced performance analysis does essentially everything that you needed to do. So after you run this, and y'all feel free to jump in if you see something really interesting here, this is what the report looks like. So in my SQL analysis scenario, it's actually saying like, hey, you've got 3 things that are jumping out here that you need to pay attention to that are high level. So databases have log files located on the disk where the host caching is enabled. Since the log files have heavy write workloads, this configuration can result in performance degradation. I did this intentionally. So in a lot of the stuff that Pam and I cover, we say, hey, definitely don't do this. There's really no reason to turn on read caching for your log files. If you do it, this Perf Insights is going to let you know, hey, this is a waste and it's not helping you here. And it's actually going to pinpoint this situation. In fact, it's even going to tell you, I love this, it's even going to tell you, when you expand this out, this is the database and these are the scenarios that's being affected. So you have a database where you've turned on caching and it's not going to help you, and these are the databases that are going to be affected. How much time do we have here? Just a couple of minutes.
2 minutes,
okay.
Yeah.
So I would go into more detail here, but this is essentially what you're going to get from the overview. Okay. So really quick, for the sake of time, if I go into storage, this is what I mean, like from a documentation perspective, that's really powerful. From the high resolution disk usage situation here, I'm getting my IOPS and my throughput, and it's mapping it against the performance of my disk. So here at this 5,000 mark, this is a P30. You can see I'm just going over the P30. I'm under the P40, P50. So my P30 outside of the spike is able to handle this quite well. The same is true for my throughput. So I have this spike here, but do I want to tune for the spike, or do I want to accept that and handle that from a total cost of ownership situation? So you have that and a lot more. So if you go through, I can see what's in my storage pool. So there's my data in my log file. I can see how my volume is mapped, and there's that G drive here that I misconfigured. If I go to my disk map, I can see that there's that mistake I made, right? My log file, I turned on read-only caching. So it's going to let you know this, and it's going to give you deep information. Do you have write acceleration enabled? Do you have host caching enabled? Do you have, what is your interleave? What are the number of columns that Aditya talked about before? Absolutely love Perf Insights. I definitely recommend running this. Yes, before you have a performance problem, but run it anyway, just to get a good summary and see if it's kind of like a really quick health check. And I'm at time, but just want to show y'all a little bit about what Perf Insights can do. And let's pull up our last slide here.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you everyone.